Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So today I got a really fun and exciting episode for you guys this Friday because we're going to be talking about the Taito Wowow, Taito's unreleased console from 1992 that was showcased at a Tokyo game show and never seen again because it was cancelled. And I've been getting a lot of questions about the Wowwow and the X55 data net station, which is basically just a Taito F3 arcade board as a karaoke console. So I figured we'd talk about the Wowwow and I would tell you that you basically played it even if it never actually released. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. Now the Wowwow was a very interesting and strange piece of hardware. It had a full CD-ROM on board, but games were supposed to be distributed over a satellite network system a la the Super Nintendo Satellaview, except a little bit earlier than that. And there was a few games that were supposed to play on this, one including Parasol Stars. If you actually take a look at the details of the Wowwow, it gets very confusing, and I'll go over why that is in just a moment, but one of the 3 to 4 games that was previewed coming to the Wowwow was going to be Parasol Stars. So this is kind of the graphical effects and elements you would see within the system if it did release. Now the confusing thing is this comes with a CD-ROM drive, but all of the games were stated to be distributed over a satellite network. So not sure if that CD-ROM drive was just intended to play audio music, but it doesn't seem like the game distribution format. But the interesting thing is this was basically developed as a pivot from arcade hardware. So we have our first clue here as to what the Taito Wowow really was. I'm going to break down exactly what hardware it is by the end of the video. One of the developers in an interview stated that they had modified Darius as the first game that ran on the Wowwow. Now if we actually take a look at Darius, it is a widescreen game back in the days of 4x3, so obviously this isn't what you would be seeing on the Wowwow, but modified it to run. Sounds like they brought it to a single screen like they did on pretty much every other port of the game. So as far as launch games on the Wowwow were concerned, this would have been one of them, so you get a semblance of what it would have been like and you realize that you can actually play this game. But we're going to go a lot deeper with the theory crafting and show you exactly what hardware it is. Now if we take a look at the Darius hardware, it uses 2 Motorola 68000s, and that's going to be way too high test for something like a satellite based console in 1991 and 1992, but we're getting a baseline of the hardware here so we can get over to what this actually truly is. And the interesting thing is we do have the screenshot here as well, and I'll zoom in just a moment, but you're going to instantly see recognizable characters from Taito's games, including the characters from Parasol Stars. You're going to see Bub from Bubble Bobble. You're also going to see some ships from Darius as well as Roston from the original Roston game, and if you don't know, that's one of my favorite games of all time. So again, we're getting a little bit more of a clue what's going on here, although Parasol Stars was never released to arcades, so that is kind of the outlier there. If we take a look at some of the 68000 based hardware, you're going to see a trend starting. You have a Motorola 68000 CPU, you have a Zilog Z80 as far as the audio is concerned, and then you have a Yamaha sound chip which varies. But if we take a look at Roston, this is kind of our first clue into what you would have expected on the Wowwow and what it would have sounded like. So go ahead and listen to Roston just for 30 seconds. I love this soundtrack, and I'll come back and tell you more about what hardware the Wowwow actually used. But enjoy. So that's a little bit of what the Taito Wowow could have sounded like if Roston was in fact distributed on the system. And while we don't have Parasol Stars as an arcade release, we do have Rainbow Island. And if we start following the years around a little bit, we're going to be able to craft this theory just a little bit more, because the Wowwow was in development in 1991 and 1992, and Roston is a game from 1987, but again it's using a Motorola 68000 processor. But we have a lot further to go here. But when the developer talked about this being modified arcade hardware, we have a very good instance as to what Taito would have been doing. That is the X55 data net station. I did a video on this over 2 years ago. It is a karaoke machine that would have been distributed both to home users as well as bars and restaurants, and it had the ability to download games and play them on the actual hardware. It did this over a telephone line where you could basically just use a dial-up modem and have games download to the actual device so you could play them. And if we haven't gotten into it already, the Wowwow is satellite based. Now if we take a look at the inside inside of an X55 datanet station, we're going to start seeing very similar hardware to the Taito Type F3. This is basically what Taito was doing with the X55 datanet station. They were taking an arcade board like the F3 and they were putting it into a box where you could play games. This is the Wowwow concept realized later on down the line, and that is just super interesting. Obviously Taito decided to try to build the Wowwow based on an arcade board, and they found that the issues with the satellite service were too cumbersome to overcome, so they canceled that, and 3 years later they released the X55 datanet station, which uses the F3 hardware and a telephone line, because telephone lines are a lot easier to deal with than satellites. So basically the X55 is the evolution of the Wowwow, and if that's built on the Taito Type F3 arcade board, then what arcade board would the Wowwow been built on? That's what we're going to get into in just a moment. But this is basically a direct lineage to the Wowwow, so if you want to pick up an X55 datanet station, they don't do anything whatsoever, but it is a very fun curiosity, and it does really help lead into what the Wowwow would have done. And this is something that Taito was working on for a while. Since like 1990, they were trying to get a home console into the market. They started with the Wowwow and they moved over to the X55, but they made it a karaoke machine, try to have a dual purpose of the actual hardware, but they were porting a ton of their arcade games to the X55 datanet station. That way they could basically just take one game and sell it twice. So much so that if you actually take a look at Cleopatra Fortune here on the F3 arcade board, if you go into the test menus, there's an X55 demo mode that you can turn on, and then when you boot the game again, after you get the high score table, you get an ad for the actual console in and of itself. So Taito was able to finally release something like a Wowwow, and we know it runs on the F3 hardware because I've torn it down on camera, and I will leave a link to the description below. So now we really have our lead in to tell you what the Taito Wowow truly was. It is, in my opinion, a Taito F2 system. You have the Motorola 68000 at 12 MHz, you have the Zilog Z80 at 4 MHz, similar chips what were being used in Roston, and you also have the same Yamaha sound chip here as well. And that was all in development in 1989, so if we skip forward 24 to 36 months and you're trying to develop a console based on your arcade hardware, the F2 100% hits that time frame window to be what you would modify for a home audience. And considering the Motorola 68000 was so prominent in so many consoles already, it makes perfect sense to bring that over. Something like 1992, you get Dino Rex, an absolutely abysmal fighting game that is hilarious for all the wrong reasons, and I love it for all the wrong reasons as well. But this is what the Taito Wowow would have looked like if it was sitting underneath your TV in 1992, 1993 if you lived in Japan. And that is why I'm trying to say that you have played the Taito Wowow, you just didn't really realize you had. And it's all down to the X55 datanet station being a Taito F3. It seems like they just evolved the idea of the Wowwow into something that could get away from the satellite broadcast service being so slow. Or something like Growl here, released in 1990, would have been in development in at least 1989, which puts it again in the wheelhouse of the Wowwow development. If you need an arcade board to pivot over to a home console, you look to what you currently have and you've had for a few years, and you 100% understand putting the Taito F2 arcade board directly in the wheelhouse of what you would have picked if you were trying to convert arcade hardware to a home console. So now that you know that, you can hear exactly what the Wowwow would have sounded like, and I'll be right back. So now you get an idea of what the Wowwow could have sounded like, but we go back again to the interview with the engineer that helped develop the console, and they talk about the issues with data streaming across a satellite system. So something like the CD-ROM not being employed is very confusing. If we take something like the Growl ROM, it's 2.35 megabytes, and the Dino Rex ROM is 5 megabytes, so that makes more sense as to why they would do something like release Darius that's underneath a megabyte, and it further explains why in the future they would go over to something like a telephone line system so you could download games that were a little bit larger. But even then, if you go through interviews and they talk about the X55 datanet development process, they're talking about games that are 400 to 700 kilobytes in size. So the issue with the Wowwow was that you had hardware based on arcade hardware, but you couldn't really distribute a lot of awesome games without 100% just sitting there forever trying to get that data to come over a satellite line. If you're ever wondering what the Taito Wowow was, everything points to it being a Taito F2 arcade board, and if you're ever wondering what the X55 datanet station console was, that's clearly just an F3 in a different style box. So if you ever wanted to play the Taito Wowow, just go ahead and play some Taito F2 games on MAME. It's exactly the same experience you would have been getting if the Taito Wowow came to home markets. And if you like these theory crafting videos, leave me a comment down below. I've got a couple ideas for a couple more that I may or may not do, depending on how this video does views wise. But short of that, we're done. Go play some Wowwow in MAME, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.